I rekindled my fire for light, and whilst I was revising the notes of my past day's journey, I was suddenly roused with a noise behind me towards the mainland. I sprang up on my feet and listening. Distinctly, I heard some creature wading in the water of the isthmus. In 1773, William Bartram started on a 4-year expedition into the southern part of what is now the United States, and his adventures led him to eastern Florida, and he has some amazing adventures and descriptions about what Florida was like in the 18th century in his journal here. He was traveling to Lake George. He says, "From this place we enjoyed a most enchanting prospect of Lake George through a grand avenue. At about 50 yards distance from the landing place stands a magnificent Indian mound. About 15 years ago I visited this place, at which time there were no settlements, yet in that uncultivated state it possessed an almost inexpressible air of grandeur, which was now almost entirely changed. At that time there was a very considerable extent of old fields round about the mount. There was also a large orange grove, together with palms and live oaks, extending from near the mount along the bank downwards, all of which has since been cleared away to make room for planting grounds. But what greatly contributed towards completing the magnificence of the scene was a noble Indian highway which led from the great mount on a straight line 3/4 of a mile, first through a point or wing of orange grove, and continuing thence through an awful forest of live oaks. It was terminated by palms and laurel magnolias on the verge of an oblong artificial lake. This grand highway was about 50 yards wide, sunk a little below the common level, and the earth was thrown up on each side, making a bank of about 2 feet high. Neither nature nor art could present a more striking contrast as you approach this savanna. The glittering pond water played on the sight through the dark grove like a brilliant diamond on the bosom of the illuminated savanna, bordered with various flowering shrubs and plants. He goes on to describe this. He says, "But that venerable grove is now no more. All has been cleared away and planted with indigo, corn, and cotton, but since deserted. Then there was now scarcely 5 acres of ground under fence. It appeared like a desert to a great extent, and terminated on the land side by frightful thickets and open pine forests." Amazing, even within the 15 or 20-year time period that he'd visited this place, it looked one way, then it looked another way, and then changed yet again to something completely different. It's amazing how rapidly the landscape changed, even in the 18th century. And today, you know, we might visit some place and then 20 years later we come back and it's completely built up, completely different. William Bartram didn't just have a simple trip in the woods, going down a beautiful path and seeing amazing vistas. He had certainly dangerous situations. At one point he is going up the river in his canoe by himself. He doesn't have a lot of provisions. He views a great battle of alligators ahead of him, and he's concerned, and he needs to get some food also. He says, "I concluded to be expeditious in my trip to the lagoon in order to take some fish, not thinking it prudent to take my fusee with me, his musket. I left it lest I might lose it overboard in case of a battle, which I had every reason to dread before my return. I therefore furnished myself with a club for my defense, and I went on board my canoe. Penetrating the first line of those alligators which surrounded my harbor, they gave way, but being pursued by several large ones, I kept strictly on watch and paddled with all my might towards the entrance of the lagoon, hoping to be sheltered there from the multitude of my assailants. But ere I had halfway reached the place, I was attacked on all sides, several alligators endeavoring to overset the canoe. My situation now became precarious to the last degree. two very large ones attacked me closely at the same instant, rushing up with their head and part of their bodies above the water, roaring terribly and belching floods of water over me. They struck their jaws together so close to my ears as to almost stun me, and I expected every moment to be dragged out of the boat and instantly devoured. But I applied my weapons so effectually about me, though at random, that I was so successful as to beat them off a little. He goes on, I soon caught more trout than I had present occasion for, and the air was too hot and sultry to admit of their being kept for many hours, even though salted or barbecued. I now prepared for my return to camp, which I succeeded in with but little trouble by keeping close to the shore. Yet I was opposed upon returning or re-entering the river out of the lagoon and pursued near to my landing, though not closely attacked, particularly by one old daring alligator about 12 feet in length, who kept close after me. And when I stepped on shore and turned about in order to draw up my canoe, he rushed up near my feet and lay there for some time, looking at me in the face, his head and shoulders out of the water. He manages to scare that alligator off, and yet I then proceeded to cleanse and prepare my fish for supper, and accordingly took them out of the boat and laid them down on the sand close to the water and began to scale them, when, raising my head, I saw before me, through the clear water, the head and shoulders of a very large alligator moving slowly towards me. I instantly stepped back, when with a sweep of his tail he brushed off several of my fish. It was certainly most providential that I looked up at that instant, as the monster would probably in less than a minute have seized and dragged me into the river. The next night, after listening to the roaring of the alligators all night long, which disturbed his sleep, the next night he has yet another adventure. So we think of alligators in Florida, okay, that seems like the kind of adventure you would have, but this one caught me a little off guard. It being now almost night, I returned to my camp, where I had left my fish broiling and my kettle of rice stewing, and having with me oil, pepper, and salt, and excellent oranges, hanging in abundance over my head, which he says is a valuable substitute for vinegar, I sat down and regaled myself cheerfully. Having finished my repast, I rekindled my fire for light, and whilst I was revising the notes of my past day's journey, I was suddenly roused with a noise behind me towards the mainland. I sprang up on my feet and listening. Distinctly, I heard some creature wading in the water of the isthmus. I seized my gun and went cautiously from my camp, directing my steps towards the noise. And when I had advanced about 30 yards, I halted behind a coppice of orange trees, and soon, perceiving two very large bears, which had made their way through the water and landed in the grove, about 100 yards distance from me, and they were advancing towards me. I waited until they were within 30 yards of me. They began to snuff and look towards my camp. I snapped my piece, but it flashed, on which they both turned about and galloped off, plunging through the water and swamp, never halting, as I suppose, until they reached the fast land, as I could hear them leaping and plunging a long time. They did not presume to return again, nor was I molested by any other creature except by the occasional awakening of the whooping of owls, the screaming of bitterns, and the wood rats running amongst the leaves. That's an adventure. That's a story you'll tell other people. William Bartram has amazing adventures, and the descriptions about what's going on in eastern Florida and other parts of the southern United States at a great read. It's truly a fun way to connect with history, kind of get a read of what they thought it was like what it was like in the 18th century. And then, we get to visit a different kind of wild preserves here in Florida that still exists. Right now I'm at the Princess Place Reserve. Amazing spot to visit. Very, very close to where William Bartram was having his adventures. It's like you can walk right in their footsteps. Thank you for coming along with me today on this adventure. If you are interested in William Bartram's book, I will put a link down in the description section, and I hope you have a wonderful day.